Hello, my name is Francis Coliato, your Executive Director at Visual Communications. In our work to create spaces for expression, engagement, and empowerment, VC and our partners proudly present the Asian Pacific Virtual Showcase. It is our hope that this showcase of our stories will be a start for audiences to rediscover our humanity. In solidarity with our partners, our collective movements not only exhibit actions towards diversity, equity, and inclusion, but our anti-racist work to uplift storytellers who use the power of media to dismantle supremacist structures. Thank you for joining us today as we continue to move forward in uplifting and connecting our communities. Welcome to the Asian Pacific Virtual Showcase.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you all for being here today. My name is Kat Carrito Bonds, and I am a Filipina with curly hair and glasses. I'm wearing a light gray sweatshirt, and over my left shoulder, I have a bouquet of flowers that are purple, orange, and red. And over my right shoulder, I have artwork that was made by my daughter. I am calling in from the San Fernando Valley, also the unceded land of the Tongva and the Chumash. And I am currently the marketing director at Homeboy Industries, and I'm also a longtime fan and community arts communicator and producer out of Los Angeles. And I would next like to pass it to Larissa and Baldwin.
Hi, everyone. I'm Larissa Lamb, and I am the director and producer of Far East Deep South. I am seated in front of a virtual background that is orange in color. There is a poster in the background of our film Far East Deep South. I am wearing a cobalt blue jacket. I am Chinese in ethnicity with medium black hair, and I'm seated next to my husband, Baldwin Chu. Oh, and we are calling in from the land of the Tongva, the indigenous land of the Tongva, which is also known as Pasadena.
My name is Baldwin Chu, and I am the producer of Far East Deep South. I am Chinese American, but some people might think I'm Filipino just by the way I look. My hair is parted to the side and black, and I am wearing a black button-down collared shirt.
Hi, everybody. My name is Tyson Suzuki. I am Black Japanese, and I am wearing currently a Malcolm X blue hoodie, purchased from a small business who really supported a lot of the actions that were happening last year. I am calling in from, of course, Tongva land, but here in downtown Los Angeles. I am actually a producer as well as business owner and just all around activist. So, yeah, passing it out. Welcome, everybody.
Awesome. Thank you, Tyson. Well, I'm going to throw out the first question for our chat today. How have you brought solidarity into your work? I'm so excited to be here with filmmakers, and so I want to hear what y'all have to say. So yeah, how have you brought solidarity into your work as filmmakers?
Who wants to start?
Oh.
We can start. We have been working really hard, especially the past year with Far East Deep South, in terms of not making this an Asian story. You know, I think that's one of the things that we want to really get across is this is not just a Chinese American story, even though it's about Baldwin's family, but it's not even just an Asian American Pacific Islander story. It really is an American story. And, you know, if you see the film, you can see the intersectionality of not just within the Asian community, but that of the Black community in the South, and even the white community. And so what we have done is, you know, we've even worked with predominantly Black film festivals like the Chicago Southside Film Festival to partner in getting conversations going. And out of that too, we did this really great conversation with iWin Digital and A Space for Creators, where there was a theme of immigration, because I think a lot of times people don't necessarily think of the African diaspora and the immigrant experiences there. And there was a lot of similarities, especially for newer immigrants who have come to the country from Africa or for the Caribbean. And so we were able to partner in those types of conversations. And moreover, I mean, our greatest goal is trying to influence the education system and also just what is portrayed in media and our conversations. And so we've been really grateful to have aligned ourselves with many racial reconciliation centers across the country, especially those that are rooted in the church, because we know with the civil rights movement, there have been so many incredible figures like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., like Frederick Douglass, who have roots with faith. And so we have partnered with organizations like the Frederick Douglass Foundation to amplify our conversations and to see where we have common history with our communities.
Bringing solidarity is definitely difficult. Can you guys hear me, by the way? I just want to make sure my mic's good.
It's a little staticky, but we could hear you.
Okay. You know, solidarity, last year was one of the most difficult years for my business. I run an entertainment marketing company called Tyflux, and because the way that COVID was set up, we all kind of lost a lot of resources as well as income. So I started to see how social justice was a huge situation post George Floyd. I couldn't even watch the whole film of the recording. And I found myself at City Hall, and every day I would just show up to City Hall, and it was literally like, it felt like an open mic session for people to voice their opinions on how we can relinquish the chains that bind us through racism, primarily through white supremacy. And what we found ourselves, or what I found myself doing, was creating these sort of everyday protests in downtown Los Angeles, at City Hall, across the street from the LAPD headquarters. And before that, we would all gather around in this park. And this park is on 2nd Street, directly across the LAPD headquarters. And before we get started, we would have everybody introduce themselves and talk about their first experience with racism. A vast majority of people that I saw coming to these were allies. Believe it or not, there was a large presence of AAPI, which made me proud, you know, and a large portion of I would say, you know, people who felt very jaded by the system and how white supremacy has impacted them. And we would go around and we would do these breakout groups. Within the breakout groups, there were, you know, there was one person of color in each group. And we would have these very, very uncomfortable conversations about race and what was their first experiences with racism, but also what can we do moving forward? Because a lot of the things that we're missing are things that are never said. And what the beauty of 2020 did for racism was it surfaced every sort of conversation that has been swept under the rug when it comes to, you know, oppression, and when it comes to racism, when it comes to systemic racism, when it comes to white supremacy and whatnot. So, you know, having these breakout sessions to me was one of the most impactful, I think, ways, besides, you know, trying to advocate for policy change and whatnot. So, Kat, how are you doing?
I'm good. Well, so how I've brought solidarity into my work. You know, I feel very thankful that my work has just always been intersectional. You know, I think it really started from the roots of where I went to school at UCLA. What's up,
Go Bruins?
You know, where I found a home there really wasn't in the academics. It was in the work and the community that kind of took me in, which was a coalition of communities of color. And that, to me, that was where I felt most, I just felt most at home, you know, and not to, and, you know, it wasn't all rosy all the times. There were difficult conversations that were had between the different groups. We fought, we wrestled with a lot of things, but I think underneath it all, the solidarity that we had was because we knew what we were fighting for, which for us it was equal access to education. I'm going to date myself, and I was in college when affirmative action was taken away at UCLA 25 years ago. So that was a time where we were not, we were just our mass actions and our protests together, that way that they were preventing people of color from coming into the university was a rallying point for us. So that was really where it was born for me. And throughout my career, I just always looked for that feeling, like that led me to my work. So through my work in I was in an artist collective very many years ago called the Balagtasni Collective. I was a poet in my past life, and we were embraced by both the API community and the Los Angeles community at large. The Latino community, the Black community has always welcomed us to come and join their events and things like that. So it was just, it's a reality that in Los Angeles that I lived. So I looked for it in the work too, and that continues today, with my work with Beat Rock Music and being part of that artist collective, which is majority API. Our artists are Black and API, but our audience is, everyone, all ethnicities and identities. So, and we wouldn't be anywhere without the people who listen to us, and support our artists. So that's kind of where it really started. I mean, I read something on Instagram, right? Like our latest wisdom, our meme wisdom there, but it said, there's no liberation without community. And so I just always look for that feeling of community to reach liberation, essentially.
Yeah, and I think your community and developing that community is so key. I mean, I think in all the examples that we're talking about, it's like we just can't put up a meme, right? And we can't just put up a social media post, that these have to be real relationships and ongoing ones, really. Even with like our film, it's like we don't just say, watch our film, we solved racism, right? That's not the case. This is a long haul in terms of developing these allies, developing these partnerships. And I think it does start with the human experience, where we can sit down and talk about our experiences with one another, even the hard conversations, right, that we're mentioning. But we have to build that trust and that friendship so that we can share these things that normally don't get talked about, and eventually kind of solve and turn the tide of how we're going to approach racism and eradicate racism ultimately.
Yeah, there was something, if I may add, in the film that I really loved, was you didn't shy away from the realities of the leaders. Like, I think there was someone who helped with with immigration, yet was a segregationist. And I was like, that I love that was illuminated, that there are like these complications and these nuances, that we can't just blanket things and situations all the time. And the work really sometimes is in finding those stories of solidarity and unity and openings for community. I really loved that part in your film.
Yeah, certainly we were conflicted at one point, because obviously we wanted a film that would leave people with a good taste in their mouth. But I think for us to ignore some of the pain and the darkness is unfair to what really is history and what really was reality. You mentioned that immigration is complicated, race is complicated, but relationships shouldn't be complicated. So if that's the one thing that we can have, which is open and honesty and being able to embrace who we are and who we all are, then that makes a big difference. I was talking to Dr. Robert Voss, who's in our film, and he's white, and he's a historian, and he was mentioning to me a couple weeks ago how he, as a white professor, a white history professor, has to really confront history and all of it. He can't say that history belongs just to himself or the white community because they are the ones that authored the majority of the books. At the same time, the history doesn't belong to us. It doesn't belong to the Black community. History just is. And for historians and for people like him and educators to not tell the whole story is not only a fallacy, but it's wrong, and it destroys what they do even as historians.
And we feel like if people got more of the whole story, which is, why we made the film too, is like I think there would be stronger solidarity, and there's solidarity and stronger allyship because we would see more of our connecting points to each other historically.
I got a chance to watch the film as well, and my father's Japanese, and there's something that I noticed, with relationships to your parents. They have this sort of, and I don't know if it's primarily in our culture, in Asian culture, where the conversation is let's not talk about it. When you would ask your father, like, hey, what about grandpa? And he would say, terrible, it's something terrible happened and whatnot. But, I feel that this is something that's so prevalent, right? This sort of this self-muting of struggles, which essentially in the long run make us a lot stronger and relatable. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think, when we have that mentality of just, put our heads down and not talk about the past and just try to move forward, it actually does a disservice to everyone else to understand the struggles that we had to go through to get us to where we are, rather than just saying, oh, let's just highlight the success. Let's just highlight where we are. And I know that the older generation comes from a place where they just don't want to burden the younger generations and not let them have to deal with what they went through. But it is in a way a disservice to not just our generation or the younger generations, but it's a disservice to all the other people groups that don't understand the struggles. And it doesn't allow for opportunities for us to share some sort of commonality, even if the commonality is dark. It doesn't allow for us to share in those things.
Yeah, and I think, as we kind of talk about relationship building, I'd love to hear from both of you as well of all the experiences in your community work. Maybe start going back to Kat. What do you think are those keys to building those relationships, and how can we be more intentional with building solidarity?
So I think that the building relationships, and I think I can also just say this, to my kids, I'm old. I don't want to say I'm super old, but I would say that, when you've got some years under your belt, you kind of can see, and just by time, right? If you have the blessing to live a long time, you have a bunch of different experiences with relationships. Like you've been on the other side of certain things, and, just stemming from, personal relationships which reflect into the professional and the community is like, when we can go through relationships that we don't just cut off abruptly, or that we just don't, we say we're done, we shut off, and when we are given the opportunity to hold space and to keep open and to not, be conflict averse, right? So much more comes from that. And that's something that resonates in different ways. Even when I was in business school, we talked about how, even in the business setting, right? Like we talked about when you have customer service, for example, right? And if a customer is mad and they're angry or whatever, they, the best opportunity to come back is what in capitalists call it service recovery, right? Like it's like, this is the time for you to, the opportunity where there's something negative is when there's an opportunity to either open it or close it. So you can either get, And I was like, oh my gosh, that like I mean, that's how it's, couched in business talk. But even in our community talk, like if we continue to move forward and say, hey, like, I'm sorry, I was wrong, or I was ignorant to this, opens up a bigger possibility than just saying, I'm not going to play anymore. I'm going to disengage, for example, as, I follow Asian American theater, having, been a former staff member at East West Players. And recently there was, they brought to light, along with other Asian American theater makers and organizations, when, the awards giving organization here in
the
Los
Ovation.
Angeles, the Ovation Awards, they messed up. We don't have to rehash the whole thing, but they messed up. And so they were called, to be accountable to it. And then after that, rather than, for whatever, I'm sure there's other reasons, but instead of like sticking around and making it right, they folded or they stopped. And for me, as as a theater goer and somebody in the community, I was like, well, that's unfortunate. You gave away the opportunity to make things potentially better. And maybe something else will come better now, but I will say that was my first thought, is like, why disengage? Why not walk into the engagement to say, yes, we messed up, we were wrong, let's work on this together. And I also think, as people of color, as people of struggle, we have it in our intergenerational DNA to be resilient, like even when seeing your dad, hold on, I was like, he was resilient. Like there was a whole part of his life that like he was like, I ain't talking about it. Right. But, and even as an older person, he could have continued that, but he chose to open up, of course, with all of your loving, nudges, I'm sure. But
I don't know if his was as loving, but mine was loving. But
you know what I'm saying? Like those are the ways that we heal and we change and we grow. Like we face the difficult stuff.
Right.
And I will say that that's the healthiest relationships that I have, whether they're personal or professional, is when we can work through that and find ourselves on the other side in a better place.
Yeah, I think there's so many people that run away from conflict, right? As opposed to, let's talk about it and how can we make this better. And as you mentioned with the LA Stage Alliance, I mean, example, I find that happens a lot nowadays, where people are afraid to say things, probably because they're afraid to get canceled. And I think this is an example where we'll just cancel ourselves before anybody can cancel us some more. But the real solution is we have to, one, extend some grace and room for growth and help people along their journey. Because I think that's the thing, is people are works in progress, and we have to understand, like, not everybody's at the same stage, and people may have the old way of thinking, and so it is important to kind of work with people through those conversations, and not be afraid of that conflict, and certainly find productive ways. Tyson, thoughts from you on this?
A lot. A lot. We have so much work to do. I think the maxim, silence brings violence. Like we have to have these conversations, but I think unapologetically, unapologetically and being intentional on how we have to just really, really discuss our struggles and understand that these are character development traits that are bringing us together. There's a lot of community building happening within Los Angeles. Within the work that I do with Active Advocate, we've had particularly this event called Feed Skid. It happens every Tuesday at 5, 5th and San Pedro, and we're literally an on-the-ground movement of people who volunteer their time. We show up and we actually give out PPE, and we give out hygiene kits, and we give out snacks. Because we've been so frequent with it, and this is probably another conversation to be had about consistency, but we consistently show up on these days. We've managed to embed ourselves within the Skid Row community. So we'll be passing stuff out, and I'll see Linda come out, and Linda's just like, "Hey, Tyson, you won't believe what happened to the other tent over there." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, what's going on over there?" And like we have like this sort of community-based development that's happening. And touching back on Kat's point, community is one of the most important things that I think we have to share. We Asian culture in general, AAPI culture in general, is so vibrant. It's super vibrant, and we'd be foolish not to share more than not just more than our food. We have to share, our experiences.
And absolutely.
I was gonna say share our souls.
Yeah,
right.
Share our souls. Yeah.
And I think that's something our community can do a little bit better job of. I mean, as an example of Baldwin's father, I mean, I think, his feeling of being closed off is slightly protectionist, but again, he also didn't think anybody cared about his story. So when we told him that we made a whole movie about him, I think it was hard for him, because he's like, oh, the history is important. We want people to know about segregation impacting our community and the Chinese Exclusion Act, but who cares about my story and what my family went through? But that's the exact thing people need to know to humanize our stories. And to kind of piggyback off what both of you have already shared, I mean, I think another important key to relationship building is inviting people. We were just part of a conversation that was hosted by a Chinese church in the Bay Area, and they had invited a couple of Black professors and community organizers to the conversation. And for one of them, they're like, I wish we could have more conversations like this. And it took somebody to take that initiative. And that's what's important. Or even to bring yourself into, step into a meeting, if somebody who is AAPI, to join organization, or to step into a meeting, let's say of the NAACP. Like, how often do we actually go and participate and to listen and to serve others that are not like us? And so I think that's a challenge on an individual and even from a broader perspective.
I think a lot of times we feel like if we're going to step into a place, then we need to do something in order to show that we have value. And I think most of the time we don't need to step into a place and show that we have value. We need to just step into a place and show that we are there. And we can learn how to become valuable later on, but that doesn't have to be the first time you step into that place.
Now, in this last year, I mean, we acknowledge a lot of civil disobedience and change that's happening in shelter in place. And how has solidarity impacted your life? How have you seen solidarity within your lives? And I'm going to start off with Kat.
Sure. How has solidarity shown up in my life and has impacted my life? Well, I would say that, I'll talk about just some parts in my work life. And I want to say that it was actually really folks, while in the community, I was very much couched in the Filipino and AAPI communities here in Los Angeles. When it came to my work and professional life, a lot of my mentors are actually Black men and women who, just took me under their wing to teach me the ways of the business, and I want to say that the way that they opened their arms to me was just an incredible blessing, so when we talk about solidarity, the ways that I've been shown love by other communities throughout my life is really has just always been really the thing that keeps me going and reminds me and humbles me to pay it forward. Growing up in Alhambra, I will say, where there are, a lot of Chinese and Latino and Vietnamese. So there were some Filipinos, but not very many. And I was actually just kind of caught in the middle. Like, there was a lot of, there were a lot of Asian folks who I did not connect with because I didn't speak the language, and I don't know if it was because, I my last name was Spanish or whatever, but I actually connected more with like, the Latino kids, starting out. I mean, as we got older and we all got to know each other in high school and all of that, it was fine. But I distinctly remember that as a child. So there were times that like, I think about the evolution of different relationships and what are the seeds of solidarity. It takes that time to like flourish and grow, and times where I didn't find support from my community per se, there were other, folks of color who showed me that love. And I think, and really were there to look out for me or to even teach me, it was Black women who taught me, no, you need to ask for your wage. You need to counter offer. You need to ask for what you're worth. They uplifted me as a young marketing professional back then. And so I they're my big brothers and sisters. They looked out for me in a time where, if there was something I was ignorant about, they taught me about, and but in a loving way. And that's always set forth an example of how I hope to continue to be for next generations of practitioners of color. So yeah, so that's how I would say it's impacted my life, in general. And I think that's really what I held on to in this time of this past year of upheaval in so many ways. Is what I held on to was the good and what is part of my growth. I went back to say, because there were so many things that could throw us off of our foundations in the past year, right? But I went back to that. I went back to what made me strong and what made me grow. And also I'm acknowledging that my experience may not be everyone's, but it is very, even with the great experiences that I have in the moment, you can forget, like in all this negativity and all of these messages and all of these painful moments, you can forget. And then you got to come up for water and be like, no, all right, this is what I'm made of. This is what made me, And even if it wasn't it's like, that's still the thing that we can still grasp for if it wasn't it wasn't there for us prior, right? Is that we can, that we can reach out and that we can connect. One of my best friends always said, anytime that you feel alone, that you can always reach out. The answer is always to reach out and not to isolate. And there's so many times that you feel, especially during COVID, that we just wanted to turn into ourselves and isolate because we were forced to or whatever. But if we always know in our mind that we can reach out and there is a community for us, I don't know, I think we'll be in a better place.
Yeah, this year has produced beautiful sentiments like that in the midst of isolation. At the same time, as you mentioned, it has been really challenging. And I think for us, releasing, a film through the film festival circuit last year was very, very challenging. One of the things that I know that we ended up kind of seeing a different viewpoint in terms of solidarity is, I think initially when we made our film, we were thinking, okay, we're going to help educate people about the Asian American experience. And certainly that is a focal point of why we made the movie. But in the wake of George Floyd, I think one of the byproducts that happened was we now kind of took it on as an extra responsibility that, we need to educate our community, our AAPI community, on the history of the Black experience, through the lens of our film, and in the sense that even though there's tons of material, not as much as there really needs to be, but there's still, written books, there are TV shows and other resources that people could learn the Black experience. But unfortunately, a lot of times the people in our AAPI community maybe aren't interested or don't feel like they have a connection. And somehow watching our story or hearing it from other Asians, was more palatable, if that makes sense, especially for newer immigrants and an older generation. And so we found ourselves in this place where we wanted to be really strong allies to the Black community to really help our community understand what was going on for those who didn't understand. And then, I'll let Baldwin speak to this a little bit, but what also has been heartening is in the episodes of all this Asian American hatred, racism, and attacks, we've had our Black brothers and sisters reach out to us about what's been going on.
Yeah, I mean, I was gonna say, 13 months ago when we first released the film, and then right, a week before they shut all the theaters down, um, we were also going through all these reports about, Asians getting attacked, and at one point the statistics were not looking good. Looking at, we were hearing reports about the rise of the attacks by other people groups, and then George Floyd happened. And so we were in this battle for ourselves, trying to to let people know that, hey, we need to stop this type of hate and this type of violence towards our own people group. And then we all saw George Floyd, and we saw our community shift from saying, oh, we need to stop attacks on me and us and our people. And now we see another larger cause right now that's unfair. And so let's shift and rally with the Black lives and with what's going on with social justice and what's going on with the Black community. And what we saw also was that our film showed where the Black community started was talking about their relationships with the early Chinese community. And it wasn't us talking about our relationships with the Black community. We wanted the voice in our film to come from the Black community to describe their relationships with us. And I think when people started seeing that part of the film, it allowed our community to be like, oh, the Black community actually cared about us too, And so we hope that what our film does is it allows people to say, like, okay, our community, Asian community, if the Black community was going through segregation, if they had a history of slavery, and if all this Jim Crow stuff was written for them, yet it affected us, and yet we have the Black community talking about the relationships with us and how it was positive, then why can't we at this moment or in any other moments also step up for them and say, like, okay, we see commonality. We saw that when you had it bad, you came to us and helped us. Why can't we at the same time do the same today in this present time?
Yeah, and I know, Kat, you were mentioning, I think before, we officially started our conversation, that sometimes, like, our communities don't necessarily think we have each other's backs, and that's kind of a difficult thing. As much as we're talking about the solidarity and the bridges that we all have built here. Oh yes, and Tyson, definitely. I know you were talking about this as well. What are some things that we can do to kind of bring us even closer together?
Solidarity in the wake of having a social distance. It sounds. How do we balance it? It was definitely difficult, but I've noticed it really comes back to finding stories worth fighting for. At the end of the day, everybody has a story worth fighting for, regardless your color or creed. And I think a lot of the times I found some of the most vigilant allies in the movement, AAPI and some, it was through having these conversations and stories and sharing these stories, these oral traditions, as one would say, like these conversation pieces about, this is what I've experienced, this is what I was going through, being multiracial, within my community and within others, like other communities, there are these sort of like, these fractions I noticed of I would say, different groups in the Black community. Sometimes it can be, disagreeing groups like light versus dark, colorism and whatnot. And I think once we realize that we're up against a bigger machine, and we had after having these conversations, and we realize these bigger machines, like the systemic change that we need, has to basically allow us to see past where we feel another person is on a hierarchical level, that we just have to do the work. I feel that that's where the solidarity was set in stone, with from hundreds to even thousands of protesters who showed up to our rallies and marched in the streets. I noticed that. And even with my work with FYI Films, I'm grateful for Alex Munoz. If you see this, one of my mentors, he brought me on Poor Films by Youth Inside. And we go into these sort of incarceration programs and inside the jails. And finding this restorative justice that may not have been attained, all came from just having the ability to tell stories worth fighting for, which brought everybody together to objectively create a film, and whatnot. And the objective for FYI Film is to create films by youth inside. And I think that really, really paved the way for solidarity with that program, but also solidarity with the movement that I did with Active Advocate. Mm-hmm.
It's awesome.
Wonderful. Well, as we wrap up, I just wanted to ask one last question. So are there any solidarity campaigns that y'all are working on now, and how can we and the larger community support?
Well, we just have ongoing efforts to broaden the way our American history is discussed, and really helping people change their perception of the AAPI community as being perpetual foreigners. As we know, a lot of times people just see somebody with an Asian face and they automatically think, you must not be from here, and that you don't belong here. And so we really believe that in the long term, education is very important. And so we have an education distributor, New Day Films, and our film is now on Canopy on the university systems. And certainly in terms of middle school and high school education, if you know teachers, if you know other educators, feel free to let them know about our film. And especially as we talk about segregation and we talk of the American South, we really want to see that broaden to include the AAPI experience and other people of color that have been historically excluded from those stories. And of course, we're working with different corporations and organizations in terms of doing a lot of diversity, inclusion training and conversations, and multicultural groups. And you want to tell them about the First Class Initiative?
So our First Class Initiative allows us to bring our film to schools and organizations that may not have a budget, especially due to budget cuts through COVID and the last year, the pandemic year. And we know that there are students out there that need to hear these stories, to know that we are together, to know that there has been a history where there were different people groups, Asian and Black together in a time where they found solidarity, but they're not being taught that in schools because it's been erased from their history books. And unfortunately, a lot of these schools that don't have the funds or the budgets are in these areas where they are majority minority. So our First Class Initiative allows people to donate to our 501c3 campaign, education campaign, where you can get a tax deduction, but allows us to go into those schools and say, hey, here's the licensing. Somebody else gifted you a license so that you can have this program, so that your community of color, your community that may not have these resources can have this resource.
And feel free to find us at fareastdeepsouth.com.
Awesome. Tyson, do you have any campaigns to illuminate or amplify?
Of course, I always want to amplify FeedSkid every Tuesday, 5 o'clock, 5th and San Pedro. A lot of the times, most people don't realize it, that, the community of Skid Row is there because of redlining. Redlining being a way to marginalize any sort of culture and to or put them in a disadvantage and give them, a certain area to be stuck in and whatnot. Come out to FeedSkid because the vast majority are Black, and this is an opportunity for anybody to come through and understand the struggles and build these sort of relationships and sort of a better understanding of how we got to this and how we can fix it. A lot of it is like when we get there, we're greeted so well because we're people understand us. We actually have a tent where we have a resident who stays on Skid Row who holds space for us there regularly. So if you can make it to FeedSkid for Active Advocate, you can go on Active Advocate on Instagram. All our social handles are Active Advocate if you need to find any information. Also, just staying in the street, staying grounded, find a way to, in some way, shape or form, protest. You have to protest in your personal life, and you have to protest in your social life in some way, shape, or form. Whether that means you're marching in the streets, but finding a way to just, interject, because there are these sort of like opportunities where people will give you a sort of perceived notion or an assumed notion of how you or what they perceive you to be. Oh, you're Chinese, you must like rice. Well, what if I grew up in the South and I like potatoes? So it's like, you have to have this sort of opportunity to speak up. But I think in general, having more marches over the summer, Asian solidarity marches, Black and yellow marches is one of the things I want to hold space for over at City Hall. So stay tuned. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. And I'd like to just illuminate and amplify a couple things. I'm, as I mentioned, I'm part of a music collective called Beat Rock Music, and we are supporting the work of an organization or coalition called Justice for Angelo Quinto, Justice for All. Angelo Quinto is a Filipino-American young man from Antioch, California, who just before Christmas was killed by Antioch PD in a similar way that George Floyd was killed, with a knee to the neck. And so his family brought it to the public when they weren't receiving any responses from Antioch PD as to what happened and what they were going to do about it. So Justice for Angelo Quinto, Justice for All is an organization that is, building solidarity and coalition to support the family's demands for accountability by Antioch PD. So their Instagram is Justice for AQ, Justice for All. I'm pretty sure we'll put it somewhere in the descriptions or captions or anything, but Beat Rock Music is supporting that work through our creative means. And then also just a quick shout out to my work at Homeboy Industries. For over 30 years, they've been doing work with erasing the margins and standing with the demonized. So I would just say there's so much I could go on, especially as the marketing director. So I would say just, go to the website and see how there are different ways to get involved, big and small. And, I'm also glad to build with anyone. And you can reach out to me via social media and all of that. Well, I'm sure we'll add that information in the captions and stuff too. So
yeah, reach out to all of us on social media.
Reach out to all of us on social media. We're all
we'll
here.
reach back.
Yes, in solidarity and in
That's
community.
right.
Absolutely.
So thank you all. Yes.
It was great being with you all. And thank you, Visual Communications, for hosting us. And we have new friends here. Hopefully everybody watching, you're our friends too. So let's all work together.
Yeah, don't be afraid of these conversations.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.